Russia and Ukraine have carried out their biggest drone attacks against each other since the start of the invasion. Russia says it has intercepted 84 Ukrainian drones over 6 regions. The Defense Ministry said more than 30 drones even approached Moscow. That forced flights to be diverted from 3 of the capital's major airports. Now, these are images of the aftermath released by Russian media. Officials say 5 people were injured in an area near Moscow and 4 houses caught fire due to falling debris. As for Ukraine, its Air Force said Russia launched 145 drones across the country, with most shot down. Now, this barrage of attacks comes as Donald Trump, who is now the president-elect of the United States, has pledged a quick end to the war. Speaking to the BBC's US partner CBS News, the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said that Biden will urge Trump not to abandon Ukraine.
President Biden will have the opportunity over the next 70 days to make the case to the Congress and to the incoming administration that the United States should not walk away from Ukraine, that walking away from Ukraine means more instability in Europe. And ultimately, as the Japanese prime minister said, if we walk away from Ukraine in Europe, the question about America's commitment to our allies in Asia will grow.
In the United Kingdom, the head of the armed forces has said that Western countries should continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. His comments come amid uncertainty over US backing for Ukraine following Donald Trump's victory. James Landale has more.
The aftermath of a massive drone strike. But this is not Kyiv. This is the outskirts of Moscow after one of the largest Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia since the war began. Across the border, this was the scene in western Ukraine after Russia's own offensive, thought to be one of its largest drone attacks. Russia is making gains on the battlefield and putting pressure on Ukraine's energy network, at least according to this man, the head of the UK's armed forces. But he said Russia was also suffering huge losses, 1,500 killed or wounded every day. And
the Russian economy is under more and more pressure, and the Western approach has been to be really clear that Western countries will maintain their support to Ukraine and to do that for as long as it takes.
As such, he said Britain had to invest more to strengthen the armed forces. Ministers insist their support for Ukraine is resolute, but this Treasury Minister refused to say when the government would meet its target of spending 2.5% of national income on defence.
I'm not going to give you a date today because we have to allow the Strategic Defence Review to conclude, which will inform our decisions about how much money we need to spend and what we need to spend it on.
But in the meantime, will President-elect Trump continue to support President Zelensky?
Great honor to have you.
He says he wants the war to end, but on what terms? The Kremlin said it saw positive signals.
Firstly to you, Lord Mandelson.
The man tipped as a possible future ambassador to the United States suggested Ukraine might have to compromise, giving up NATO membership ambitions and even what he called the fringes of its territory.
We've got to act in a way, together with the United States, to secure Ukraine's freedom and secure its borders so that Russia can't invade again. Now, I think both those things are possible, not by Ukraine joining NATO, but by NATO members offering security guarantees.
For now, the fighting in eastern Ukraine continues, with analysts expecting Russia to try to press home its advantage as power is transferred in the US.
Meanwhile, the Washington Post is reporting that Donald Trump has spoken to Vladimir Putin for the first time since his re-election and that he urged the Russian leader not to escalate the war in Ukraine. We know that over the course of his presidential campaign, the president-elect pledged an immediate end to the war, though he didn't offer details of how he would do so. Our North America correspondent David Willis has been following that report from the Washington Post.
There's been a lot of uncertainty regarding Donald Trump's intentions in regards to Ukraine. Well, now it would appear that discussions have already begun. That's if the report in the Washington Post today is to be believed, which says that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin spoke by phone last Thursday and discussed the situation in Ukraine with Mr. Trump, as you just pointed out, warning that Mr. Putin should not seek to escalate the conflict in Ukraine, warning that Washington has a sizable military presence in Europe. Now, Mr. Trump's press spokesman, Stephen Chung, would not confirm or deny that report in the Washington Post. He said that the campaign does not comment on Mr. Trump's contacts with foreign leaders. But Donald Trump on the campaign trail, of course, Steve, said that he would resolve the conflict in Ukraine within a day, as he put it, without actually specifying how he intended to go about doing that, although it's thought that he will rely heavily on his relationships with foreign leaders, in particular, perhaps, that with Vladimir Putin, somebody he has come to admire over the years and somebody who he has expressed confidence in the past. And indeed, he's referred to Vladimir Zelensky, by comparison, as the greatest salesman of any politician that ever lived. Well, read into that what you will, but I would have thought that it doesn't bode particularly well for Mr. Zelensky's attempts to get further military and humanitarian aid in terms of billions of dollars that have been forthcoming from the United States, Steve.
Yes, and all of that funding coming on the back of the work by President Joe Biden. He's called on Donald Trump not to abandon Ukraine. Any indication of whether or not Mr. Trump will listen?
Well, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said today that Mr. Biden would be using Donald Trump's visit to the White House on Wednesday of this week to urge the president-elect not to abandon Ukraine. The point has been made, of course, as well, that the Biden administration intends to pump through billions of dollars in humanitarian, economic and other aid, military aid as well, in the weeks that remain before the transition to a Trump administration. But to get some idea of perhaps where the Trump administration or future administration stands on all this, there was a reposting of an Instagram pictorial tonight by Donald Trump Jr., Donald Trump's son, which showed a picture, or shows a picture of Volodymyr Zelensky with the caption, "You are 38 days from losing your allowance." Read into that what you will, but I wouldn't have thought that it bodes particularly well, as I said, for the administration of Ukraine, Steve.
Yeah, President Zelensky certainly won't want to see that. And just remind us, David, just quickly, about the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
Well, they spoke by phone on Thursday, as I mentioned, and Vladimir Putin said that he was ready for dialogue, apparently, with Donald Trump, wanted to restore relations between the two nations, Donald Trump agreeing with that. And Vladimir Putin praised Donald Trump, we're told, saying that he, Donald Trump, acted like a real man during that assassination attempt in Pennsylvania back in July. And, of course, Donald Trump is known to favour autocrats such as Vladimir Putin, perhaps more so than he does democratically elected leaders such as Volodymyr Zelensky, Steve.